Prince Harry is taking on the tabloids in a brand new trial out of the UK, but unexpected news from the courthouse brought things to a screeching halt. We have a reporter on the ground covering day one as it all centers around accusations of hacking and phone tapping to get some personal information on some very high-profile people. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Hey, so before we jump into things, I don't know if you know about this, but the video version of Sidebar is now available on Spotify. That's right. We are so thankful for your guys' support of Sidebar. Us getting this show on Spotify video is truly due to how loyal this audience is, so thank you so much for that. And yes, you can now watch and listen on the go, from Diddy to the United Healthcare murder updates, the crazy court moments. It is all on Spotify. So right now, you can scan the QR code on screen or click the link in the description to follow Sidebar on Spotify. A major and highly anticipated trial was supposed to get underway today out in the UK, but fighting between the lawyers on both sides and the judge, now things have taken a sudden turn, an unexpected turn, I should say. And this all concerns Prince Harry, fifth in line to the crown, because he filed this major lawsuit against media titan Rupert Murdoch's News Group newspapers that owns outlets like The Sun and the now shut down News of the World. And Harry is joined in this legal action by former Member of Parliament Tom Watson. In both complaints supposed to be heard at this trial, the allegation is that journalists who had worked with investigators used unlawful means to gain private information about well-known subjects of their stories. And there was also an effort to conceal evidence of wrongdoing. So there are allegations of phone hacking, phone tapping, blagging, that is using deception or tricks to learn information. And Prince Harry is claiming that there are a series of actions that were undertaken to dig into his private life from 1996 to 2011. Although, to be clear, his phone hacking claims were actually dismissed from this case, so it's only going to be focused on illegal information gathering. That's going to be the main focus of this case. But what is interesting about this is this comes after dozens of other people, including actors like Hugh Grant and Sienna Miller, allegedly settled their claims against Murdoch's newspaper group, reportedly because the costs of the litigation were just so high to go to trial. They couldn't do it. Now, Prince Harry told the New York Times he is in a rare position. Quote, "One of the main reasons for seeing this through is accountability, because I'm the last person who can actually achieve that, and also closure for these 1,300 people and families. I will be damned if those journalists are going to ruin journalism for everyone because we depend on it." Again, under English law, it's our understanding if he loses, he could face significant legal fees. So there is a lot of risk here for him to do this. And we expect a number of high-profile people to testify during the course of this trial, and we believe that Prince Harry will testify at some point too. Now, to be clear, Murdoch himself is not a defendant. We don't expect him to testify. But there is a lot at stake here too for him, for the founder of Fox News, the man who holds a controlling interest in the Wall Street Journal, the Times of London, the New York Post. I mean, a trial involving his publication is like the last thing he wants, considering what, 2 years ago, Fox paid almost $800 million to settle a massive defamation lawsuit regarding claims of voter fraud in the 2020 presidential election. Fox faces another almost $3 billion trial this year surrounding another voting machine company regarding the 2020 election claims too. And this trial could also have an impact on the Washington Post, more specifically, because Will Lewis, who is the publication's current publisher, he is at the center of an allegation of deleting evidence in connection with the alleged hacking of the prince and other cell phones. So could the results of this trial affect his employment there? He's already reportedly faced significant blowback from those inside the publication. So let me just give you a brief history on this to get you up to speed before we talk a little bit more about what's happening today. So Prince Harry had actually testified in a previous trial. He testified against Mirror Group newspapers in a separate case, and the judge there, who's actually the same judge in the current case involving the Murdoch publications, held that Prince Harry was a victim of, quote, widespread and habitual hacking, awarded him over $170,000 or over 140,000 pounds. He actually ended up settling the rest of his claims in that case. And by the way, talking settlement, you know how I mentioned before that many parties actually settled their cases? Well, much of that centered around Murdoch's now defunct News of the World publication. And one of the things that came to light that led to its downfall was when it was exposed that the publication's journalists had apparently hacked the phone voicemail messages of a 13-year-old girl who was missing and ended up dead. She was murdered. It actually resulted in criminal charges, jail time for a few people. And when it comes to this lawsuit brought by Prince Harry and MP Watson, News Group Newspapers has been fierce in their defense. A spokesperson saying in part, quote, "In 2011, an apology was published by NGN to victims of voicemail interception by the News of the World. The company publicly committed to paying financial compensation and since then has paid settlements to those with claims. In some cases, particularly those relating to the Sun, it has made commercial sense and in accordance with common litigation practice for the parties to come to a financial settlement without NGN accepting liability. Lord Watson makes allegations of unlawful information gathering and phone hacking concentrating on the period 2009 to 2011. NGN strongly denies that any of its titles hacked Mr. Watson or acted unlawfully and will also argue his claim is brought out of time. The Duke alleges unlawful information gathering from 1996 to 2011. His claim will be fully defended, including on the grounds that it is brought out of time. Both claimants allege unlawful destruction of emails by News International between 2010 and 2011. This allegation is wrong, unsustainable, and is strongly denied. NGN will be calling a number of witnesses, including technologists, lawyers, and senior staff to defeat the claim. NGN's case will involve a range of relevant witnesses to defend the case, including current and former employees. So all of this was supposed to get underway today, but after delays and an early finish, we are actually no closer to real court proceedings. There is a long and frustrating day for journalists across the pond, and that seems to include UK correspondent Luke Hanrahan, who is going to be covering this trial for us out in London. Luke, thanks so much for coming on. I need you to make sense of what's happening here because, look, in the States, court proceedings are confusing. Abroad, it can be just as confusing, maybe even more confusing. So the trial was due to begin this morning. It has faced delays, right? What can you explain what happened today in court?
It was an incredibly chaotic day today at the Royal Courts of Justice in London, to say the least. I can tell you the mood was one of confusion in the press room as we listened to the judges' continued delays. Prince Harry's lawyer, David Sherborne, requested 3 separate delays to allow for further discussions behind the scenes. The judge, Mr. Justice Falcone, made it clear he was unhappy with these requests, describing the situation as involving entrenched, well-resourced armies refusing to give ground. Despite this refusal, the judge's decision to allow an appeal effectively pushed the hearing to tomorrow. After less than an hour of actual court proceedings, the case has essentially stalled. These repeated delays have fueled speculation, though, that settlement talks are underway. While nothing is confirmed publicly, the atmosphere at the court suggests significant behind-the-scenes negotiations are probably still taking place.
And by the way, you had mentioned to me one of the reasons for the confusion is the actual room you're in. You can't really hear what the judge is saying, right?
And that's because all of London's press really descended on the Royal Courts of Justice today. So most of the press pack were pushed into an overflow room, which means that we were really just sitting around watching a monitor and listening in to the judge. But the judge's microphone, there were a few issues with that. So at times, journalists were looking around, seeing whether other people had maybe heard what he'd said. So a very confusing day for many reasons, not least because we were struggling to hear the judge.
The idea that there would be an offer to settle, I mean, what do you know about this? How could it affect the case? It seems surprising considering that Prince Harry has been very adamant about going after NGN here.
And that's probably one of the other reasons we were all quite confused. We were expecting the case to begin today. There is, though, growing speculation, as you mentioned, that NGN has made a settlement offer to Prince Harry and the other plaintiff, Tom Watson. While the details remain confidential, the repeated delays and collaborative requests from both legal teams suggest progress is probably being made. NGN has a history of resolving similar cases through settlements, reportedly spending over £1 billion to avoid public trials. If a settlement were reached, it would likely prevent new revelations about NGN's alleged practices from coming to light. However, as you say, Harry has made it clear this case isn't just about compensation, it's about accountability and reform within the British tabloid industry. If settlement talks fail, the trial could still expose significant new evidence and set a precedent for future cases.
It's very, very well said there. I mean, I think that's why we have a lot of eyeballs on this one. And you said that the hearing is now expected to resume on Wednesday. What are we looking out for? What are the key developments? What should we be watching for? Do you know what might happen on Wednesday if there's not a settlement?
I guess that's the point. I mean, how long will these legal teams be chatting to each other, potentially long into the wee small hours of tomorrow morning? Barring any further delays, if settlement talks don't lead to an agreement, the case is likely to begin tomorrow, and all eyes will move to Harry's testimony. Today's delays hint at the complexity and stakes of this case. NGN continues to deny all allegations and insists no unlawful activity has ever occurred at the Sun. Wednesday's proceedings will provide a clearer sense of whether this trial moves forwards or shifts direction due to an agreement.
Let's talk a little bit more about the substance of this. Can you talk to us more about former Deputy Labour Party leader Tom Watson, his complaint, his involvement in this case? What are his claims?
Well, Tom Watson, as you say, the former deputy leader of the Labour Party, a former MP, has also brought a claim against NGN. He alleges that his voicemail was intercepted, and that was potentially going to be used against him while he was investigating unethical practices in the tabloid industry, which I suppose shows you what's at stake here for NGN, because if it transpires that a senior politician who was examining unethical practices was then himself targeted by phone hacking, it almost shows you, the levels that NGN potentially were prepared to go to target people who questioned them.
And when it comes to Prince Harry, my understanding is the phone hacking claims are not part of this case, but it's illegal information gathering. What exactly are the specific instances he's talking about? Because my understanding, again, is like from 1996 to 2011. What are the specific examples he is citing for illegal information gathering with respect to his private life?
Well, Prince Harry has previously mentioned that it really did take a toll on his private life because he was constantly looking over his shoulder. Who is leaking this information to the press? How is this information being gathered? And that is really the core of this case against with the plaintiff being Prince Harry and NGN being on the other side of things. How was this information garnered, and what impact did that have on Prince Harry's personal life? And Prince Harry's personal life will play a part here. The impact that these proceedings have continued to have on him is something that he is very public about. His testimony will likely be very personal in detail, and we will hear more about these alleged breaches and how they have impacted him, as you say, since 1996, so going back a very long time.
Do you know when he will take the stand, when he'll testify?
Well, that, again, is one of the big questions in this case. The likelihood of him taking the stand, if the trial continues, is certain. But when, we still do not know. This case is going to be exceptionally long. I think it's earmarked for as long as 10 weeks. The whispers are, though, that he will be here in the first week of February, which is likely to be true because the Invictus Games, which are taking place in February, will be taking place in, I believe, the second week, and he hasn't missed them so far. So we're all anticipating that he'll be here in London in the first week of Feb.
And by the way, I've also read that with that specific phase, right, I believe the trial is going to start off with trying to understand the industry, how it works, and then you move on to the specific phase where you have celebrities like Prince Harry testifying. Who are these celebrities that may testify during the course of the trial about the harm that they suffered? Who can we expect to testify, and what would they say?
Well, we don't exactly know which individual witnesses will be called, but when they are, they're almost certainly going to include celebrities, as you mentioned, and it'll probably be people like Hugh Grant, Sienna Miller, and the comedian and actor Steve Coogan, who've previously been linked to similar cases and could be called to describe the harm that they personally suffered when their phones were hacked and their personal information was rifled through. Testimonies from high-profile figures will or could lend weight to the Duke of Sussex's and Tom Watson's broader claims of systemic wrongdoing by NGN.
And these are celebrities who settled their cases, right? Because my understanding under English law, one of the reasons they settled is because the stakes are just way too high, right? To go to trial and potentially lose. Talk to us about that. Talk to us about what is at stake for a celebrity like Prince Harry to take this to trial and potentially lose. What's at stake for NGN if they lose?
Well, financially, the stakes are enormous. Obviously, if NGN loses, they could face damages potentially in the millions. But of course, an organization like NGN has millions. For individuals, they are potentially faced with having to cover the astronomical legal fees that go into these cases. For Prince Harry, it's less about the money, though. That's what his message is. It's more about accountability, holding the tabloids to account. Reputationally, a loss for NGN could be absolutely devastating, which is why they've made every effort to avoid getting this far in the past. It would publicly potentially expose their malpractices. Conversely, though, for Harry, losing this could undermine his broader media reform campaign. So there is a lot at stake. There is a reason for both parties potentially to be talking about settlements. But the messaging we've had from Harry up to this point is that, no, I am going to face trial, which was, again, why today came as a bit of a curveball. But it might be that proceedings get underway tomorrow and everything carries on as we expected it to today.
Is this in front of a jury? Do they decide this case?
Yeah, this is a bit of a confusing one potentially for an American audience. But yeah, actually, there's no jury in this case. Civil cases in the UK are typically decided by a judge alone, which means Mr. Justice Fancourt will have his final say at the end of this. This also means the case will focus heavily on the legal arguments and the evidence presented in court. He will weigh the evidence presented by both sides, including witness testimony and legal arguments, to make a final judgment. This type of case typically focuses on whether there was a breach of privacy, the extent of harm caused, and the compensation that might be required. The absence of a jury means the decision will basically rely on weeks of legal discussion back and forth between both sets of highly regarded lawyers, and ultimately the judge, he has to make that final call at the end of the day.
And what's interesting, and I reported this before, and correct me if I'm wrong, Justice Fancourt was the same judge that presided over the other case where Prince Harry testified against Mirror Group, and basically was like, Prince Harry was a victim there. So if you're Prince Harry, this is definitely the justice that you want to be overseeing this case.
Having spent decades now in British courts, one of the things that the judges pride themselves on is impartiality. And whilst this judge potentially has worked before in favour potentially of Prince Harry, he will simply be looking at the evidence that is presented to him over the next 7 to 10 weeks. That is all the relevant information that the judge will be basing his decision on. So I don't think there's any question that Prince Harry will be looking at this potentially and thinking, Justice Fancourt, that's fantastic. But for Justice Fancourt, there is no question that he will be looking at this purely impartially based on the evidence that's presented to him.
All right, so we will see what happens, if a trial actually happens, if there's a settlement. But Luke Hanrahan, thanks so much for coming on, being our eyes and ears about what is going on across the pond. Really appreciate it. Look forward to having you back. Tell us an update in the case.
Absolute pleasure. Really hoping that it does make it to trial and looking forward to speaking to you again. Thank you so much.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube or Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.